Hi, this is Dr. Kristen Rodier. I'm the professor and coordinator of Philosophy 252 at Athabasca University. This is the overview of Unit 2, where we are reading Chapter 2 in the Rodier and Dayton book, and we're also reading from Calling Bullshit Chapter 2, Medium, Message, and Misinformation. That piece fits in general around making and supporting claims, which is a major part of being a critical thinker. And so some of that is really looking at our own mental processes. Sometimes this gets reduced to just sort of thinking about biases. Well, I'm biased, you're biased, we're all biased. But our mental processes do a lot of really good things, and we should try to observe what they do that they do well and try to improve upon that. So even though my self-observation is imperfect, other people can help me. We can work together on trying to find things that are true together. Something that's important in this unit and all the units really is thinking again about arguments. And so an argument is this public presentation where we construct. Now this can be a bit funny because a lot of times what we're constructing are actually bad arguments, right? So sometimes we have to kind of guess, put something together in the premises and then the conclusion. And sometimes we have to think about, well, what would fix this? Or what is this missing? But essentially, when it's our own argument, let's say that we want to put something forward, we can reconstruct our thinking, we put the premises, and then we go, well, is this justified? And we can add information. And so what we really need is we need premises that do the work they're supposed to do, and they need to lead to the conclusion we say they think they do. And so that has everything to do with that support relationship. So what is that support relationship? What is that feeling when a conclusion is forced by the information that's given as the premises? Well, it depends on the kinds of claims being made. Are they deductive or inductive? And a lot of times what determines sufficiency around the premises being acceptable is this question of dialectical acceptability and cogency. So a dialectical acceptability, what does that mean? Well, what we don't want you to think it means is that as long as people believe something, then that's enough for it to be true. So dialectical acceptability has everything to do with will the claims withstand a certain kind of scrutiny? Now, that scrutiny is embedded within a particular kind of worldview, and, we don't want to take our best, or I shouldn't say best, we don't want to take our most severe forms of critical thinking, which is sort of maybe saying everything has to be verifiable by a certain conception of science, and subject every claim ever to that, right? We have to be sort of respectful of different worldviews. But reasonable public scrutiny looks like I'm making a claim about something and how the world works, and if someone else has a counterclaim to that, then we are going to have a discussion, a back and forth, a point-counterpoint, where a number of people whose reason, whose critical thinking abilities are well developed, and who have expertise in the area, recognized expertise, are going to scrutinize. That's that dialectical acceptability. Does the claim survive a reasonable back and forth around scrutiny? And if there are counter-arguments, which are good counter-arguments, right? A bad counter-argument is just, well, that's just your opinion or something like that, right? That's not a good counter-argument. But a reasonable counter-argument that says, okay, this is your claim, and you might have missed this thing. And if you've missed this thing, it really affects everything else you've said. Then if you can meet that counter-argument, that helps make your claim more acceptable over time. And also we can look at dialectical acceptability as avoiding a number of the mistakes that we talk about in this course. So are any of the claims bullshit? We don't really have to have a long drawn out, dialogue about the acceptability of claims that are just nonsense, right? And so when we talk about bullshit, here, let's talk about a little bit about that. These claims are meant to overwhelm and distract us, and they're using a particular definition of bullshit. So it's language, statistical figures, data, graphics, other forms of presentation intended to persuade or impress an audience by distracting, overwhelming, or intimidating them with a blatant disregard for the truth. So bullshit, unlike critical thinking, which is thinking disciplined by being guided by principles of good method, critical thinking aims at the truth. Bullshit has a disregard for the truth. A disregard for the truth, logical coherence, or what information is actually being conveyed. So it brings in a bit of chaos. It's exactly in the opposite direction of everything we're trying to do in this course. So it's important to be able to identify different forms of it. And so one is the nonsense bullshit, which Bergstrom and West sort of say is like really convoluted rhetoric, kind of. It's like so esoteric and jargony that you can't say anything back, and that's not an acceptable dialogue, even if those words are really fancy and academic. Counterfeiting is a problem because it's just sort of making false claims. The fire hose strategy is also part of this issue, where essentially you're spreading large amounts of disinformation, and you just sort of confuse people. You can even put out contradictory information. This happens a lot online. So the fire hose strategy is just putting out a whole bunch of stuff. Disinformation is really deliberately spreading a falsehood, right? And so this is where you get into these problems of somebody, for nefarious reasons, they're protecting themselves, there's power involved, will put out a false claim on purpose, and it just gets passed around a lot of people who have similar beliefs, that are tempted by this piece of disinformation. And it's meant to, again, it contributes to fire hosing, but really, it's deliberate and usually political. Counterfeiting, I always think, well, this is like false documents, right? But now it's kind of about false people, so people making claims online that are actually bots, or you can think about deep fakes or other things like that. So there's also the potential that something is non-intentional misinformation. So people make mistakes, or there's, imperfection in how we're observing the world. And we think then about how bullshit, the various forms that we've been talking about, kind of overwhelm our cognitive processes and show to us that we're not these perfect, transparent vehicles for information, that we're subject to a lot of, we're swayed by things. And so that's why we take a look at our claims, formalize them, and try to see whether they're justified or not. We externalize our thinking. And when we communicate, that's part of what we're doing. We're transmitting information, externalizing our thinking, and sharing, how we came to our conclusions. That's a way for us to improve. And so just to finish off this unit video, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of getting an understanding of arguments and what they're doing. So an argument is a set of premises and a conclusion, and the premises are taken to support the conclusion. So what that means is, like, I can put out to you two premises and a conclusion, and all three statements have nothing to do with each other. So that looks like an argument, but it fails in a number of ways. So one is that the premises need to be relevant to the conclusion for an argument to be cogent, right? They need to be relevant to the conclusion, and the premises, they need this feature of dialectical acceptability, and the whole thing together needs to have the feature of reasonableness. So do the premises provide reasonable support for the conclusion? So what that means is that there's an appropriate match going on between what the premises state and what the conclusion affirms, let's say. And so some of that has to do with how we're making sense of the individual statements that are going on. So you'll notice in chapter 2, we're talking about the difference between a sentence and a proposition. And part of the reason for that is that a proposition is a stipulated piece of information. It says, this piece of meaning is what I'm talking about. A sentence can have some ambiguity in it, but a proposition is fixed. And then we also talk a little bit in this chapter about the kinds of statements that even have propositions in them, right? If I say to you, close the door, that is a command. That doesn't have a proposition in it. We couldn't use it in an argument as a premise, right? And so when we make a proposition, or when we offer a proposition, we're stating it. And for it to be true, that there has to be something in the world that matches up with what that proposition claims. So when we make a distinction between, I believe something, believing it doesn't make it true. What do I believe? I believe a set proposition. So what makes that proposition, what makes that true is, well, there has to be a state of affairs that it maps onto. And if there's a state of affairs that the proposition maps, then we can say it's true. And it's true because it's a fact about the world. So we have to sort of break down, what is the statement? Is it making a claim? If so, what is the exact proposition? What would it take for that to be true? What would have to be going on in the world for that to be true? And then we can start talking about having a dialogue about that statement and subjecting it to reasonable public scrutiny. So that's where we start getting into making more cogent arguments, and basically coming up with ways to stipulate our premises and conclusions and how they are relevant and related to each other. This is one of these principles of good method. It's clarifying our statements, narrowing down what they mean, and making them in the kind of form where you could have a public, you could have a dialogue about them, and then use them in arguments.